Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're diving deep into a place, well, it's where continents almost touch. A thin strip of land caught between these massive seas.
Yeah, it's a place where, like ancient pharaohs, they dreamt of canals, right? Napoleon, he had his whole thing there, made a big misstep, and these days, it's all these supersized ships squeezing through, practically changing how we see globalization.
You're talking about a Suez Canal, right? I've got a whole stack of stuff here. Maps, old accounts, even some ecological studies, honestly. Kind of overwhelming, haha. So, where do we even start?
Hmm, good question. How about this picture a world, no shortcut between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea? Ships got to go the long way.
Okay, yeah, that'd make the trip from Europe to Asia, what, weeks longer and way riskier too, right? Storms, pirates, the whole bit.
Exactly. We're talking way more time, higher cost, just a logistical headache.
Right.
And that was the reality before the Suez Canal came along.
So this wasn't just some random project. It totally changed global trade. But here's what gets me the idea itself, wanting a canal there, that goes back thousands of years,
Oh, it
right?
does. And some of the early stories, almost hard to believe. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs trying to carve through the desert with, what, copper tools? Sheer willpower. Crazy stuff.
I can't even imagine the logistics of that. Who was this pharaoh? Was it like a Ramses? They always seem to be into the big projects.
Well, it's debated. Some historians think Senusret II, that's about 4,000 years ago. But others, they say Ramesses II, the Exodus story guy, he did love a good monument.
Right. So if it was Ramesses, this canal wasn't just trade, it was a power move, right? Controlling all those goods.
For sure. Now, there's records of another pharaoh, Necos II. He kept trying where others left off. And this is where it gets really interesting. Apparently, he got a warning from an oracle.
Hold on, an oracle warning? Like, don't build this canal, bad idea.
Basically. Herodotus, that Greek historian, wrote that the oracle told Necho he was toiling for the barbarian, meaning his work would only help others, not Egypt.
Spooky. So did he listen?
Seems like it. The work stopped. But Herodotus also mentions Necho was fighting Nebuchadnezzar II around then, the Babylonian king.
Ah, so maybe divine intervention in a real war put a stop to things. Priorities, right?
Right. Makes you wonder what Necho was thinking. But here's the kicker. A canal actually was built way back then, just not by an Egyptian.
Okay, now I gotta know who finally connected the dots.
That honor goes to Darius III, the Persian king. Conquered Egypt, and whether he was finishing what Necho started or just wanted his own legacy, he did it.
That's impressive. How do we even know this isn't like a legend? Did they find blueprints or something?
Even cooler archaeologists found these granite stelae. They're like stone slabs inscribed with Darius bragging about his accomplishment.
Huh. Ancient bragging rights, carved in stone. Love it.
Exactly. Darius wanted everyone to know that he, this Persian king, was the one who made it so ships could sail this incredible route.
So we've got pharaohs, oracles, and a Persian king all tangled up in this. This canal was a big deal even way back then.
Absolutely. Shows how much people wanted to control trade, connect those far-off lands. It's like a constant throughout history.
Yeah.
And the Suez Canal. This is just the start of the story.
Okay, so we've got pharaohs, oracles, Persian kings, all trying to make this canal happen. But I'm guessing things are about to get a lot more modern now, right? Didn't Napoleon have a thing for the Suez Canal too?
Oh, he did. Centuries after Darius, Napoleon, he gets fixated on this idea.
Yeah.
Sees a canal as like this strategic asset, boost France's power, maybe even challenge the British out east.
Classic Napoleon, always thinking big picture. So did he actually try to build it?
He did more than try. During his Egypt expedition, that was 1798, Napoleon sends his engineers out there searching for traces of those old canals.
Hoping to, what, pick up where the pharaohs left off?
Exactly. And they did find some remnants, proving it was possible to link the seas. But here's the irony. Napoleon makes this critical miscalculation, had to abandon his whole plan.
Wait, Napoleon, the strategist, made a mistake. Okay, now I gotta hear this. What happened?
So, based on these surveys, they thought the Red Sea was way higher than the Mediterranean.
Oh, no. Did they think they'd cause a flood? Like, unleash the Red Sea onto Europe?
Not quite that dramatic, but they were worried about needing these complex locks, way too expensive and difficult back then. So Napoleon, convinced it was impossible, he moved on.
Wow. A surveying error sidelined the Suez Canal for, what, decades? History could have been so different.
It really could have. But you know what's fascinating? Long
Yeah.
before Napoleon, someone else had the same idea, like centuries before him.
Okay, now you've really got my attention. Who else was dreaming of a Suez Canal way back then?
Picture this. It's the 1500s. Venice is the trade hub. But then New sea routes to the east pop up. Their dominance is slipping.
So they're starting to panic a little.
Exactly. They need a way to stay ahead, and they see a canal as the answer. If they can connect the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, boom, they stay on top. They were way ahead of their time.
Talk about thinking ahead. So what happened? Why didn't the Venetians build it?
They tried. Started talking to the Mamelukes, who ruled Egypt back then. But just as things were moving, the Ottomans showed up, conquered Egypt, early 1500s.
Talk about bad timing. So close.
Exactly. For centuries, the Suez Canal, it was like this what if. Then fast forward to the mid-1800s, enter Ferdinand de Lesseps, this French diplomat with a vision, and let me tell you, he was determined.
This is where things really get going. Tell me about this de Lesseps. How'd he pull it off?
He was something else. First, he gets a concession from the Ottoman viceroy of Egypt, Said Pasha, to build the canal. The diplomatic maneuvering, I can't even imagine.
I bet there was still tons of skepticism, though, right? After Napoleon's miscalculation, people must have been hesitant.
Oh, absolutely, especially the British. Worried sick about how a canal would affect their route to India. They were not happy.
So how did de Lesseps deal with that? He couldn't just ignore the biggest empire at the time.
He basically called in the big guns, assembled this international commission, even brought in John Robinson McLean, this famous British engineer.
That's a bold move. Like he's saying, don't believe me, I'll get the smartest people to show you.
That was de Lesseps. And you know what? It worked. They do all these surveys, come up with a detailed plan showing a sea-level canal, no crazy locks, was doable.
Okay, so Napoleon wasn't just wrong, he was totally off. I love that de Lesseps proved them all wrong.
It really is a story of, vision over doubt.
Yeah.
But even with the plan ready, it wasn't easy. Funding a project this big, that's tough.
Yeah, investing in something huge, untested, in a region that's, well, politically shaky, that's a hard sell.
You got it. The British, as predicted, weren't exactly opening their wallets. De Lesseps had to get creative.
So who was ready to take that gamble? Who backed de Lesseps' vision?
It was actually the French who were the most into it. They saw the potential, along with other European investors.
So it's like the French were thinking, we might not rule the seas like the British, but we can build this canal. Smart.
Exactly. And of course, no big project in the 1800s was complete without the Rothschilds.
The Rothschilds. Okay, now you know it's serious business. So money secured, construction finally begins.
It does. 1859, work starts on what will become the modern Suez Canal.
Yeah.
And it was massive. 10 years of brutal labor, dredging millions of cubic meters of earth, overcoming all these challenges.
I can only imagine the scale of this. Weren't there controversies with the workers? I've heard some things.
Yeah, you heard right. It's a dark part of the story. At first, they used forced labor, this thing called corvée. Thousands of Egyptian peasants forced to work, awful conditions.
That's terrible. It's easy to forget how much progress came at a human cost back then.
Definitely a part of the story we can't ignore. Even though they stopped using forced labor eventually, it still casts a shadow.
So after a decade of all this, the canal was finally finished.
1869, the Suez Canal officially opens. Huge global event. World leaders, everyone gathered, excited for this new era of trade and connection.
I bet that was something to see. Years of planning, all that work, finally paying off. But the real impact was way bigger than just a celebration.
You're right. Impact was immediate. Huge. The Suez Canal, it cut travel times between Europe and Asia, like weeks off the journey. Trade was faster, cheaper, more efficient.
It's wild how something as, well, straightforward as a canal could change so much.
Shows how connected everything is, even back then. And we can't talk about the Suez Canal without talking about, well, colonialism.
Right. It wasn't just connecting the world. It was about control, too, right?
Exactly. The canal made it so much easier for European powers to get to their colonies in Africa and Asia, tighten their grip. It's no coincidence that the scramble for Africa, it ramped up after the canal opened.
So the canal, meant to connect, also ended up dividing even more, giving more power to those who already had it.
You got it. And the Suez Canal story, it doesn't stop there. It gets mixed up with even more international intrigue, conflict, even some surprising environmental stuff.
We've talked about pharaohs, emperors, even oracles trying to mess with the Suez Canal. What a ride. But I have a feeling the 20th century, that's where things get really intense, right?
Oh, yeah. Remember how the British, they were kind of iffy about the whole canal thing at first? Well, that turned into like a land grab.
It's like they suddenly realized, wait, this thing we doubted is actually super valuable.
Exactly. Egypt, they were having money troubles back then. So when the chance came, Britain bought a ton of the canal shares from the Egyptian leader, Ismail Pasha.
Classic move. Someone else is weak, you swoop in and grab something important.
You said it. gave Britain control over the canal for decades, even though Egypt was still, technically, part of the Ottoman Empire.
I bet the Egyptians weren't too happy about that. Having another country control a chunk of your land.
You're right, resentment was brewing. Mid-20th century, things boil over. Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt's new leader, he's charismatic, and he decides we're nationalizing the canal. 1956, that was a big year.
Wow, bold move. What was the reaction like? I can't imagine Britain just said, oh, okay, take it back.
You're telling me. The British were furious. And it wasn't just them. France, they still had shares in the canal company. They were fuming too.
So what they do, just send in the troops.
It's even crazier. This whole thing, it sets off the Suez Crisis, a huge international incident. Britain, France, and Israel, they all teamed up, invaded Egypt to get the canal back.
Seriously, all that over a canal. That's wild, especially for the 20th century.
Right. Just shows you controlling routes like the Suez Canal, that's serious business, even if it means war. But here's the thing, the invasion. Total backfire.
Really? How so?
Well, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, they didn't want a bigger conflict, so they stepped in. Put pressure on Britain, France, Israel to back off, which they eventually did.
It's crazy how one canal could cause so much drama.
For sure. And it doesn't stop there. The Suez Canal, it kept getting caught in the middle of things. Arab-Israeli wars, blockades, even mines.
Mines? You're kidding? That's terrifying. Imagine sailing through that.
Oh, it was dangerous. After the Yom Kippur War in '73, it took a massive effort to clear the canal. Divers, special ships, even helicopters, just to make it safe again.
Wow, it's like this waterway has all these layers of history, conflict, danger hidden just below the surface.
Exactly. And the dangers, they're not always from people either. 21st century rolls around, Suez Canal is still important for trade, but new problems pop up, even some unexpected side effects.
What kind of side effects? Ecological, economic, something else entirely?
Well, think about the ships. Remember how Napoleon's guys, they got the sea levels wrong?
Yeah, good thing de Lesseps proved them wrong.
Right, but here's the thing. The canal, it was impressive for its time, but the ships using it now, those things make old ships look like toys. Massive container ships. Some so big they barely fit.
I've seen pictures. They're like floating skyscrapers.
Exactly. And in 2021, one of them, the Ever Given, gets stuck. Blocked the whole canal for days.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. Wasn't that a whole global shipping mess?
Total nightmare. Ships backed up everywhere, trade stalled, cost billions of dollars.
I can only imagine the chaos. That must have made people rethink those mega ships.
It definitely showed how vulnerable the canal is these days. And it got people talking about the environment too. All those ships, all that traffic.
Yeah, gotta have some kind of impact.
Right. And it has, but in a way you might not expect. Connecting the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, it caused this thing called Lessepian migration.
Lessepian migration sounds intense. What is that?
Think of the canal like a doorway underwater. Red Sea, it's warmer, saltier than the Mediterranean. When the canal opened, it let all these Red Sea species in, threw things out of whack.
So it's like an accidental invasion of sea creatures.
Exactly. And some of them, they're invasive species now, messing with the Mediterranean ecosystem. We're still figuring out what that all means.
Wow, this canal just keeps surprising us. Not just trade and politics, but the environment itself. It makes you wonder, what will this place be like in another 100 years? Still essential for trade, or will things change completely?
Good question. The Suez Canal, it's been a part of so much change already. Progress, conflict, even how nature itself works, shows that even our biggest achievements can have surprising consequences, some we might not even see coming.
Absolutely. From those ancient pharaohs to the megaships of today, the Suez Canal, it really captures the imagination, the story of ambition, ingenuity, this constant back and forth between connecting the world and trying to control it. As we wrap up this deep dive, I think we've got more questions than answers, but that's what makes it so fascinating. Hey there! Ready to dive into the world of Godzilla? We're going deep today, beyond the monster mayhem, with excerpts from Godzilla's own Wikipedia page.
Oh, yeah.
You'd be surprised how much there is to unpack about this iconic lizard.
That's right. Godzilla is more than just a city-smashing spectacle. He's a window into cultural anxieties and technological evolution, and even philosophical debates.
It's wild to me where it all began. The name Godzilla itself sounds totally made up for a monster movie, right?
Right.
Turns out it comes from a mashup of gorilla and whale. An inside joke at Toho Studios about a staff member's build and apparently their love of whale meat.
It is fascinating to think about the origin of iconic names.
Hmm.
This seemingly insignificant bit of studio trivia birthed a name recognized around the world. It makes you wonder what other cultural phenomena have equally surprising origin stories.
For sure. But Godzilla's story is much deeper than just a funny name. This wasn't just some monster movie. This was post-war Japan.
Right.
They were dealing with the very real horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then the Lucky Dragon 5 incident happened.
Yeah,
For those who don't know, that was when Japanese fishermen were caught in the fallout of a nuclear test and got radiation poisoning. Talk about a real-life monster story.
absolutely. Godzilla, in many ways, became the embodiment of those very real nuclear anxieties.
Yeah.
This monstrous, unstoppable force of nature, reflecting the invisible threat of radiation and the fear that humanity had perhaps created something beyond its control.
It's interesting you say that because Godzilla's destruction isn't just mindless, is it? Like,
Mm.
take the original 1954 film. When they finally kill Godzilla with the oxygen destroyer, the inventor of the weapon is horrified. He destroys his research, saying he could never let something so powerful fall into the wrong hands. That feels very much rooted in the real-world fear of what nuclear weapons could do.
Exactly. It wasn't just about giant monsters and special effects. Godzilla gave a face, a terrifying and tangible form, to the anxieties of a nation grappling with the unthinkable. These films served as a public forum to process those fears.
Which might be why Godzilla resonated so much even outside Japan, right? I mean, in America, we had giant ants and spiders and aliens in our monster movies around that time, all fueled by Cold War paranoia. The idea that something bigger and more powerful than us could wipe us out at any moment.
Precisely. Godzilla tapped into a universal fear of the unknown, the consequences of unchecked scientific progress anxieties that transcended cultural boundaries. But what's interesting is how the physicality of Godzilla itself played into those fears. We're talking, of course, about the suit.
Oh man, the suit. I was reading about those early Godzilla suits, 100 kilograms. Can you imagine? The heat, the limited vision, the sheer physicality of bringing this monster to life?
It really is incredible.
Yeah.
It's a testament to the dedication and artistry of those early performers. Actors like Haruo Nakajima, who played Godzilla for nearly 2 decades, endured incredible hardships to create those iconic moments. They poured their sweat and, quite possibly, tears into every stomp and roar.
It's amazing how those limitations actually added to the character in a way. Like, you feel the weight, the power, the raw effort in every movement. You couldn't move as fast or as agile in those suits, which made Godzilla seem even more like this unstoppable force of nature.
Precisely. The limitations of the technology, the practical effects, actually enhanced the sense of realism. But then, as technology evolved, we entered the world of CGI. The 1998 American Godzilla, for example, showcased a very different kind of monster, didn't it?
It did. Much more agile, much sleeker. Not necessarily better or worse, just different. And man, did that spark a debate in the fandom.
Oh, I'm sure. The debate over practical versus digital effects is a fascinating one. Each approach brings its own strengths. CGI allows for a level of spectacle and fluidity that practical effects might not achieve, but it can also create what we call the uncanny valley effect, especially when trying to realistically portray something that doesn't exist. Motion capture technology, however, is bridging that gap in interesting ways.
Blending the human element of performance with the limitless possibilities of digital creation.
Exactly.
And speaking of blends, can we talk about Godzilla's morality for a second? It's not exactly black and white, is it? I mean, he starts as this terrifying force of destruction, the embodiment of nature's wrath against humanity's actions. But then you have King Ghidorah showing up, and suddenly...
Suddenly, the enemy of your enemy becomes your somewhat reluctant ally. It's a fascinating shift that speaks volumes about how we perceive threats. The original Godzilla film even touches on this with the oxygen destroyer. As terrifying as Godzilla is, the film suggests that the real monster might be humanity itself wielding the power to create weapons of unimaginable destruction.
And just like that, our perspective shifts. Godzilla, initially the ultimate villain, becomes a protector when faced with an even greater bad. It's like those real-world alliances that emerge out of necessity. You might not trust the other party entirely, but you band together because there's a bigger threat looming out there. And speaking of things that are hard to pin down, what's the deal with Godzilla's gender?
Interestingly enough, Godzilla's gender is never explicitly defined in the original Japanese films. It's a blank slate upon which audiences can project their interpretations.
Which is kind of cool when you think about it. This giant, powerful creature that defies easy categorization. It makes you wonder if those assumptions say more about us as an audience than they do about Godzilla.
Precisely. It reminds us that we tend to project our own biases and understandings onto the unknown. But ambiguous gender identity aside, Godzilla's global impact is undeniable. This is a character with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame who received MTV's Lifetime Achievement Award.
Right. A star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. I mean, that's wild. And Toho, the studio behind Godzilla, takes that stardom seriously. They're famously protective of their creation. Remember those lawsuits against imitators?
Oh, absolutely.
Clearly, Godzilla is more than just a movie monster.
Absolutely. Godzilla is a brand, a cultural icon, a symbol that transcends its cinematic origins. He represents a shared history of anxieties, thrills, and pop culture escapism. Think about it. You have the serious, thought-provoking films that grapple with nuclear anxieties and environmental themes, and then you have Bambi meets Godzilla and Godzilla selling us candy bars in commercials.
It's that kind of cultural pervasiveness that makes me think back to what you said earlier about how Godzilla reflects our anxieties. It makes you wonder, if Godzilla were discovered tomorrow, not in a movie but out there in the ocean, how would we react?
Would we meet it with fear and aggression? Would we try to understand it, to study it? Would we perhaps, as we've done with so many forces of nature before, try to weaponize it?
It's a chilling thought, and it brings us full circle in a way. We started this deep dive thinking we were just going to talk about a monster movie, but we've uncovered so much more. Godzilla is a reflection of our fears, a symbol of our power, and a reminder of the unknown that still lurks in the depths of our world. It's incredible how much one fictional creation can tell us about ourselves.
And that, perhaps, is the most enduring legacy of Godzilla. A monster that continues to challenge our perceptions, to mirror our anxieties, and to remind us that sometimes the most compelling stories are those that force us to confront the unknown, both within ourselves and in the world around us. Picture this. It's the late 1800s, and the world is lit by, well, gas lamps.
Still using those old things, huh?
Hey, a little historical imagination never hurt anyone. But seriously, imagine a time when the idea of widespread electricity was as mind-blowing as, say, self-driving cars are today.
It was a real game changer, that's for sure.
And just like we have Google and Tesla duking it out now, back then, it was Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse locked in a battle for the future of power. The War of the Currents.
Ah, yes, the Battle of DC versus AC. It's a story most people think they know, but trust me, there are more twists and turns than a bowl full of those old wires they use.
So it wasn't as simple as one type of current being inherently superior to the other.
Not at all. Both direct current, DC, and alternating current, AC, had their own quirks, their advantages and disadvantages. Think of it like choosing between a trusty old pickup truck and a shiny new sports car.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Both get you where you need to go, but the journey's going to be very different.
Precisely. Now, Edison, being Edison, already a big shot inventor thanks to things like the phonograph, wasn't just interested in the science. He was a brilliant businessman, too.
Right, he wasn't just going to invent something and then let it sit there. He wanted to change the world.
Exactly. And he saw DC as the way to do it. He'd built his whole system around it, from the light bulb to the meters, everything. It was a complete package.
He created the first electric ecosystem. But there was a snag, wasn't there? Something about DC not being able to travel very far.
You're catching on. That was the big issue. DC couldn't be transmitted over long distances, effectively. So to light up a whole city, you'd need power plants practically on every street corner.
And I'm guessing that wasn't very cost-effective.
You said it. That's where Westinghouse smelled opportunity. He saw that AC, with a little help from something called transformers, could be transmitted much farther and at higher voltages, way more efficient.
Hold on, back up a bit for me. Transformers. Higher
Okay,
voltages. You're going to have to explain that one like I'm still using gas lamps over here.
imagine you've got a garden hose with a set water pressure. You can only water so far, right? But what if you could crank up the pressure to shoot that water further, then dial it back down at the other end? You'd cover more ground with the same amount of water.
Okay, I get the analogy, but how does that apply to electricity?
Transformers are like the pressure regulators in that hose analogy. They step up the voltage, the electrical pressure, to transmit over long distances, and then they step it down to a safe level for you to use in your home.
So AC could reach more people with less infrastructure. which means cheaper electricity. No wonder Westinghouse was so gung-ho.
Exactly. And that right there, my friend, is the battleground for the war of currents.
Okay, so we have Edison, the established genius, and Westinghouse, the ambitious newcomer, both vying for dominance in this new world of electricity.
Hmm.
It's like a classic underdog story, but something tells me this is just the beginning.
Oh, you have no idea. As AC started to gain ground, so did the anxieties about its safety, especially in New York City.
New York City. What was it about the Big Apple that made AC so concerning?
Picture this. A rapidly growing metropolis, streets already crowded, and then they start stringing electrical wires everywhere, a tangled web above the city.
I've seen pictures, and it looks like something out of a steampunk nightmare.
Yeah.
Wires everywhere, just waiting for something to go wrong.
It was an accident waiting to happen, and tragically, accidents did happen.
Like what? What kind of accidents?
Well, there was a lineman, John Feeks. His death became a turning point in public opinion about AC.
What happened to him?
He was working on what was supposed to be a low-voltage line when it came into contact with a nearby high-voltage AC line.
And those transformers that make AC so efficient were also capable of generating significantly higher currents, right?
Exactly. And unfortunately for Mr. Feeks, the result was, well, let's just say it wasn't pretty.
I can imagine. And the newspapers had a field day with this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Headlines screamed about the dangers of death by wire. And just like that, public fear of AC was ignited.
Fear is a powerful motivator. I have a feeling someone was about to capitalize on this.
You'd be right. Enter Harold Brown, an electrical engineer with, shall we say, a flair for the dramatic and a very public vendetta against AC.
Harold Brown, huh? Sounds like this guy was really out to get AC. What was his story?
Well, Brown was very vocal, let's say, about the dangers of AC, claimed it was way more dangerous than DC, even at lower voltages.
And how did he try to prove this claim? What did he do?
He put on these, well, demonstrations, public ones, and he would use AC to electrocute animals.
I mean, I know things were different back then, but geez, that's pretty awful.
It was a pretty gruesome spectacle, though, gotta admit, it was effective. Those demonstrations, plus the media sensationalism, played right into the whole death by wire narrative. People were terrified.
And as if things weren't already tense enough, a new invention pops up that just throws gasoline on the fire. The electric chair. Talk about a shocking turn of events.
It's a pretty dark and frankly bizarre chapter in this whole saga.
Yeah.
See, New York State was trying to find a more humane way to carry out executions.
Right.
You know, they had some botched hangings, and it was a whole mess.
Yeah, I can imagine. Not exactly a good look for the justice system.
Exactly. So this dentist, Alfred P. Southwick was his name, he got fixated on the idea of using electricity for executions.
A dentist.
Yeah.
Now, that's a career change waiting to happen.
Right.
What did a dentist know about, well, electrocuting people?
Beats me. But he was convinced that a quick jolt of electricity could, cause a swift and painless death. He even built a prototype of the electric chair.
Okay, but somebody had to actually build the real deal. Is this where our friend Harold Brown comes back into the picture?
Bingo. New York State put together a commission to study this whole electrocution thing, and they brought in all sorts of so-called experts, including, you guessed it, Harold Brown.
And I'm guessing Brown saw this as the perfect opportunity to further his anti-AC agenda.
Oh, absolutely. He was all about using AC for executions, saw it as a way to prove how dangerous it was, even claimed it was more lethal than DC, which, isn't exactly scientifically accurate, but...
Yeah, but it played right into his narrative. So we've got Brown pushing for AC executions. What about Edison? Didn't he jump at the chance to really stick it to Westinghouse?
Actually, Edison initially wanted nothing to do with the electric chair. He was against capital punishment, at least in theory.
A moral stance from Edison. That's surprising.
Yeah, well, his tune changed a bit when they started asking which type of current should be used. That's when he saw a chance to really deal a blow to Westinghouse and AC.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. What did he do?
He sent a letter to the commission, and in typical Edison fashion, he subtly threw Westinghouse under the bus. Suggested they use those alternating machines, even mentioned Westinghouse's company by name.
So he basically implied that AC was the best choice for executions because it was more deadly?
Exactly, and it worked. The commission decided to go with AC for the electric chair.
So much for Edison's moral objections to capital punishment. It's amazing how quickly those principles went out the window when his business was at stake.
Yeah, well, his actions had some unintended consequences. By associating AC with death and danger, he accidentally made it the go-to choice for executions for decades to come.
Wow, talk about irony. But how did Westinghouse take this? His own invention being used for something so grim? I can't imagine he was too thrilled about that.
He was furious. He publicly condemned Brown's demonstrations, calling him out for being biased. He even offered to pay for the appeal of the first guy sentenced to die in the electric chair, a man named William Kemmler.
He put his money where his mouth was, trying to save a convicted murderer to protect his company's reputation. That's pretty hardcore.
It was a bold move, for sure. Westinghouse argued that electrocution, especially with AFI, was cruel and unusual punishment.
Which, honestly, it kind of sounds like it was.
Yeah, the whole thing was pretty gruesome. And of course, it became a huge media spectacle, which just added fuel to the fire of this whole debate about AC's safety.
So we have fear, we have death, we have corporate espionage, and now the ethics of capital punishment are all tangled up in this technological showdown. This war of currents is way more intense than I ever imagined.
Yeah.
But who ultimately won? Was it Edison's DC or Westinghouse's AC?
Well, in a surprising twist, it wasn't really a clear-cut victory for either side.
A merger. Now, that's not exactly the epic showdown I was expecting. Sounds more like something you'd see on Wall Street than the finale of this whole technological revolution.
Well, it does add another layer to the story, doesn't it? You see, by the 1890s, both Edison, General Electric, and Westinghouse Electric were feeling the pinch. All those lawsuits, building up their systems, dealing with the safety concerns, it was expensive.
Yeah, I bet. Easy to forget about the bottom line when you're caught up in all the drama of competing visions for the future.
Exactly. And, this is where Edison's stubbornness about DC might have actually backfired.
What do you mean?
Well, while he was busy with other projects, the folks calling the shots at Edison General Electric, they were starting to see the writing on the wall.
So even Edison's own company was starting to realize that AC was the way to go.
Pretty much. AC just made more sense for large-scale power distribution. It was adaptable, efficient, and yeah, maybe a little bit dangerous if you weren't careful.
So what happened? Did Edison put up a fight?
Oh, you know Edison. He was furious. But there wasn't much he could do. The company he founded, they ended up merging with their biggest rival, Thomson-Houston, and guess what? Thomson-Houston, they were already all in on AC.
So Edison's own company basically ended up championing the technology he'd spent years trying to destroy. Talk about a twist. But what about Westinghouse? What happened to him through all of this?
Westinghouse. Well, he had the last laugh, you could say. He kept innovating, kept winning those big contracts. And you know what really solidified his place in history? The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago.
Ah, the Chicago World's Fair. They had all those amazing electric lights, right? It was like nothing the world had ever seen.
Exactly. And guess whose AC system was powering all of that dazzling spectacle?
Westinghouse. Millions of people from all over the world seeing what electricity could really do. It must have been magical.
It was a defining moment. Westinghouse and AC were no longer about just efficiency. They were about progress, about wonder. It was the dawn of a new electric age.
Wow, what a story. So what's the takeaway for those of us listening here in the 21st century? What can we learn from this whole war of currents?
Well, it reminds us that progress isn't always a straight line. It's messy, it's unpredictable, and sometimes it's even a little bit dangerous. But most importantly, it's driven by people with big ideas and even bigger personalities.
It's a good reminder that sometimes those inventions we take for granted, they have these incredible stories behind them. Stories of rivalry, innovation, and yes, even a little bit of danger.
Exactly. It's about more than just the technology itself. It's about the people, the competition, and the impact it has on the world. And sometimes, like we've seen here, even the most heated battles can lead to outcomes that nobody could have predicted.
So next time you flip on a light switch, take a moment to remember the war of currents. Remember the brilliant minds that clashed, the innovations that lit up our world, and the sharking turns that history can take. It's a story that's both illuminating and electrifying.